Hey, welcome to Firescale Audiobooks. If you enjoy our audiobooks, please consider subscribing to the channel. Also, feel free to share your review in the comments section below.
I hear you've said some quite arrogant words. Theron stood in silence, not replying. Dean Thistle chuckled, but he only leaned back in his chair. He didn't feel like he had a need to display his power again. You know, if you would like to ingratiate yourself with me, you should get more used to lowering your head. If you want to use me, use me. If you want to keep losing, feel free to continue flexing your superior age. Oh, Dean Thistle burst into laughter. If you get old enough to flex your superior age as well, you'll realize just how hard that was to come by. You have little idea just how many of those like you die too early because they don't know how to control themselves, or aren't born into prestigious noble clans. But I'm sure it was all your self-made genius that got you to this point. There was a flash of cold in Dean Thistle's eyes, but he knew if he lashed out now, it wouldn't be in the best interest of his image. He had to admit, though, the child had a sharp tongue, and he knew how to use it. In the end, he chuckled once more. You know, commoners like you really do think it's very easy to be born noble. I find it quite amusing. I don't think it's very impressive to be born with nothing and force yourself to strive for something. What choice do you have? What's truly impressive is the man who has everything. There was a dense flash of red in Dean Thistle's emerald eyes, and yet still carries with him the hunger of a lion. In the corner of the room, Burns' eyes burned with an endless fanaticism. Theron stood across from Dean Thistle's desk. What must have been at least 3 meters separated them, and yet it felt like a beast had opened its maw right before his face, its roar blowing his hair back and shattering his aura. And then it was gone. Dean Thistle was still reclined in his chair. A file had appeared in his hand at some unknown time, and he tossed it onto the table. It slid across, coming to a stop right at the edge. Theron had no choice but to take a step forward to grab it, a sizzling scent of death prickling against his skin as he did so. He opened the file and read it. Thessa. Predictable. His eyes narrowed as he read. His speculations seemed correct. She was indeed a spirit mancer that followed a unique elemental path. However, what was entirely unexpected, Thessa Firewing. Firewing. The Firewing clan. Trouble. Theron had thought of a lot of things, adjusted for countless possibilities. He was already close, and everything was in the palm of his hands. But this felt like a wrench being thrown into the spokes of the wheels. The Firewing clan wasn't technically correct. They were instead known as the Firewing Imperial Clan, an empire directly adjacent to the Nightingale Imperial Clan's territory. As far as Theron knew, the relationship between the two clans had never been good, but they hadn't necessarily been at the point of war either. The idea of marrying 2 of their talents together, though was unheard of, especially since the Firewings were obviously marrying Thessa into the Nightingales. There was no way the Nightingales would do the reverse for a young man they had already given the title of Crown Prince to. What was happening here? At this point, killing Thessa wouldn't just be a matter of pissing off the Nightingales. He would be fragmenting the relationship between 2 entire empires. If he was also found out on top of that, then he would have to somehow escape from not just one imperial clan, but 2 of them. This also wasn't in line with his plans. Had he planned to kill Thessa? Yes, but the turmoil it would cause now was far more than what he was aiming for. His best guess for Thessa's identity was either the daughter of a powerhouse without a noble house backing them, or a commoner born into a great amount of talent. These were the 2 that made the most sense. He hadn't even considered this third possibility. He knew that the Nightingale Empire didn't have any extremely powerful Firemancer clans because such existences would have long found a way to ingratiate themselves with the Firewings. Much the same with the Nightingale Empire having quite a disproportionate number of Darkmancers. All things considered, his conclusion back then made sense. But this, according to the original plan, he would kill Thralix as River and then kill Thessa as Rain. He would play both sides. And because both characters were hiding in plain sight and both far too similar, the odds people would choose to connect them before it was too late were minimal. Instead, it would look as though Rain was created in retaliation of River. Thessa's subsequent death would only make that feel more real. As for the purpose of this, that much was obvious. Chaos. He would force both sides to suffer losses, weaving through them until they suffered to the point they couldn't continue to tiptoe around the issue. Soon, they would have to make a decision to either back down or go all out, and the odds of doing the former were minimal. By taking over the Imperial Academy branch, though, the Thistles were clearly planning to play a long game and wouldn't be ready for something so acute. They would be forced to rely on him more and more, especially as he continued to improve. He would take advantage of their resources to improve, making use of them all along the way. Had they already planned to kill him? Almost certainly. Would they dare to when push came to shove? Almost certainly not. He would prove too useful. But if Theron killed Thessa now, let alone getting a chance to take advantage, the war would start right here and now. His plan would fail, and all the intricate details of it he had glossed over would collapse. So, Theron threw the file back onto the table. You want me to kill a noble of the Firewing Imperial clan? One idiotic plan. Byrne's hands twitched in the corner. He wanted to cut Theron's head off with every fiber of his being, but he forced himself to stop looking so intently at the boy's side profile and instead look at his patriarch. Is that so? Dean Thistle asked, his voice flat and not carrying the slightest hint of his earlier amusement. It was quite clear that if Theron didn't have a very good reason for saying what he said, he would kill him right here. There was a certain dignity that strong cultivators needed to have. Maybe if it wasn't for Thralix and this setback, he would have already acted and Theron wouldn't even know when his head flew from his shoulders. If you were ready to start your war now, you wouldn't be in this Imperial Academy. There's a difference between winning a war of attrition and winning a war by a landslide. Why choose the former when you can have a latter? The words weren't empty. If the Thistles were so easy to defeat, the Nightingales would never allow this disrespect to continue. The fact they had such an alliance with the Firewings, and yet still let the Thistles rampage like this, well, that spoke volumes about something that Theron still hadn't fully understood yet. In other words, you aren't ready, Theron said plainly. Killing her will get you the face you've lost back, and likely strain and shatter the relationship between the Nightingales and the Firewings. But the gains don't outweigh the losses. Without the Firewings, the Nightingales will fall. Yeah? And why is it that two clans without the best of relationships have come together in the first place? Do you think talents like Thessa grow on trees? What about the crown prince of a nation? To choose to allow his empress to be the seed of another country, do you think it's easy to make that decision? Dean Thistle's eyes narrowed. I would suggest you get to the point. The two imperial clans are obviously working together for reasons I can't fathom. And judging by your reaction, you have no idea either. You're taking a risk by killing her, and you know that. You think at worst, even if they choose to continue working together, their relationship will be strained enough that there will be something you can take advantage of. But there's another possibility, and that's that instead of straining their relationship, you've instead solidified their determination to crush an annoyance. Dean Thistle didn't reply, his expression becoming harder and harder to read. Theron had already noticed this sort of pattern with old, experienced men. Sometimes it seemed quite easy to goad emotions out of them, but then they reached a point of seriousness where they became as calm as lakes. It was at this point that they were the most dangerous, the most unpredictable. Theron was unmoved. The smartest thing to do isn't to kill her, it's to defeat her. Then, you should turn your attention to the luminescent moon sect. Is that so? There's no need to play ignorant. It's obvious that the sect are going to play a huge piece here. You have the Vermouths on your side, and the Nightingales have Thessa. Is it a coincidence both of them have chosen the sect? Byrne also isn't very subtle. Clearly, to you, controlling the sects is far more important than controlling the academies. You took over the academy so easily, but are still waiting for a chance at the chosen of the luminescent moon sect. Dean Thistle's gaze shifted toward Byrne. He's talking nonsense, Dean, Byrne said through gritted teeth. What a joke. In a room full of children and teachers, it went over all of their heads. Just because you, the little monster, picked up on it didn't mean that it wasn't subtle. And with ring above, Dean Thistle didn't say anything. If you want to control the luminescent moon sect, control its chosen. Make sure that Thessa doesn't have the time to improve as much as she needs to compete. That means stopping her from getting her hands on the silver resonance flame she's obviously looking for. The odds you can do that are low, but you can certainly delay. And in the meantime, you should find a method to force the hand of the sect elders to move their chosen competition up. Dean Thistle continued to lean back in his chair, tapping his finger on the table. Every knock sounded far louder than it should, as though the wood itself was resonating with him. In defeating her, you'll do that, supposedly, he finally spoke. What do you think restrains fire best? She won't last 20 exchanges, Theron said indifferently. If Theron were to attack to kill, with as much preparation as he had for Thralix, Thesso would die just as easily. A single stroke. And how would you suggest you do that? In order for this to help the Thistles, Theron had to be one of them. But Theron had no real affiliation with them. Of course, those in the shadows would know the moment Theron appeared to do this, but it wasn't enough. Thessa's death, now that was a message anyone could understand. This, however, marry Malaya to me, Theron said calmly. Dean Thistle blinked. For a moment, his frosty indifference cracked. Pathetic, Theron thought, but his expression was anything but. In fact, it looked like there was a light of anticipation in his eyes. Theron walked out of Dean Thistle's office indifferently. After he rounded a corner, he palmed it for balance, gasping for breath. The spasms in his body continued. It had taken everything in him to not collapse. Hiding the state of his body right now was especially difficult, but in the end, he had succeeded. Now they think I have a weakness to take advantage of, Theron thought, his pain not changing the chilling cold in his eyes as he pulled himself up, continuing to walk forward slowly. After showing off so much, he needed something to ease Dean Thistle's heart. So why not let him think Malaya was his weakness? By the time he realized he had no control over him at all, it would be too late. Now, he had a battle with a certain princess consort to prepare for. As for how it would be happening, the plan had long been formulated. How was your day, little Theron? It didn't rain today. A chuckle came from the beautiful middle-aged woman. You know, only you like the rain so much. I'm not sure why. Most mansers have the ability to avoid getting wet. That shouldn't be an issue. People like to see the sun. You know, your future wife might like seeing the sun, too. You should be more accommodating. Maybe I will marry someone who likes the rain, too, Theron said with a smile. You never know. Someone you hate just might become your wife. Someone you love with all your heart might not be the one for you. Theron blinked, looking up from his book at the same time to gaze at his mom. There was an odd look in his eyes, the sort of look he got when he didn't understand something. His mother smiled. Her little boy was already 12 years old today, and she felt like she was seeing that adorable little look less and less these days. All a mother means is that the love of your life could come from the most unexpected of places. So you should treat every woman you meet well, or else you might give her ammo to blame you for a lifetime. How would my little genius feel about never winning an argument again? Theron's confused look vanished as he smiled. At that moment, he didn't really understand, but he found what his mom said funny, so he laughed. His mother smiled a knowing smile, and then her visage began to fade. Then a familiar tragedy played itself out. Theron's eyes flashed open, a chilling blue being pulled out from them. He exhaled a slow breath, feeling out the changes to his body. I need another 2 days. This was the longest it had ever taken him to recover from any training. His body simply had nothing more to give. We should be at 98% of the herbs recognized by now. We are close. The old man had been unexpectedly helpful. His garden had quite a few of the herbs that Theron was missing, many of which he used to brew his teas. As such, Theron was able to match them to his memories quite easily. Now he was close. There should only be about 4 or 5 cents he was missing. Then he could complete the deciphering. The fact that that old man had so many of the herbs in his garden means that this place should be quite local. But I wonder, Dean Thistle, if he was looking for the jade, hadn't shown any signs of it to Theron, at least. It was still possible that he was, or did Yonaway keep it a secret? It was highly likely. From what Theron could tell, Sigil was Dean Thistle's true successor, and Yonaway was more so an afterthought. Neither father nor more talented son seemed to show much heartache over the loss either. And it was possible that Yanaway wanted to keep these things to himself. In that case, where did the verdant bloomstone come from? Luminescent moon sect. It was the most obvious conclusion. Yanaway must have become wrapped up in something related to the sect, and it eventually led to him coming into the verdant bloomstone. Theron had already been forced to shift some of his plans to incorporate the sect. If the verdant bloomstone led him back there as well, then maybe he might come into a little bit of luck finally. The question is, are the nightingales and thistles so interested in the sects because they're powerful pawns to be played, or is there something else the sects have that they want? Theron came to his answer quite quickly as he pushed himself up slowly to begin his recovery before classes. If the sects were such easy pawns to manage, they wouldn't have to use such roundabout methods. He couldn't help but wonder if Yanaway had managed to pull the wool over the eyes of his own father and brother this time. It seems I'll have to see what that bully and Yanaway's good friend know. He doubted Sawyer would know much of anything. But Yanaway seemed to trust him more than usual. There was a good chance he had let something slip to this good friend of his. Now it was just a matter of finding an opportunity. There is another possibility, Theron thought with narrowed eyes. Maybe the sects weren't here because of the influence of the thistles or nightingales, but rather because of Small Nudge. In which case, Theron walked into the Nightingale Pagoda. He had almost 400,000 bronzes in his possession, and that didn't include what he could gain by liquidating the Silver Resonance Breakthrough Pill and Echo Pill that were both in his possession. A familiar, attractive, middle-aged woman noticed Theron immediately. She bolted ahead faster than she should have been capable on her heels, appearing before Theron before he could even scan the region properly. "Young Master Theron," Stara spoke enthusiastically. "It's nice to see you again so soon. What can I do for you today?" Theron gave her a gentle smile. "Today, I'd like to see if I could enter the 4th level of the pagoda." Stara was a bit taken aback when she heard this. All Nightingale pagodas had 9 levels to them. The first 3 were for those of the Bronze Resonance, the middle 3 were for those of the Silver Resonance, and the final were reserved for those of the Gold Resonance. Entering a level higher meant better treasures to pick from and better resources. But the Nightingale Pagoda didn't allow people to flout their rules so easily. If you wanted to enter, you would have to display some extraordinary skill that could compare to those of said cultivation level. Stara had a good impression of Theron, but from his actions, he seemed a bit naive and airhead. He liked to comment about things he didn't understand casually all the time. But this sort of client, given how good his commissions, she also couldn't afford to offend. "Young master, this. Bring me to the mana control test," Theron said simply. Thessa stood in silence, her eyes aimed toward the ground as she waited. There were a few others around her, though only 2 really mattered, both of whom were from the Luminescent Moon sect. They weren't really of concern. Actually, one of them was from the Ironheart clan, a young man that seemed to have become Thralix's replacement. He was Dristan's little brother, and technically the dead Thralix's cousin. He was only at the 8th resonance, but he was also about a year younger than Thralix. Though this was the case, no one was under any illusions that he and Thralix were on the same level. Not unless he, by some miracle, awakened his bloodline to Silver Resonance as well. The other member of the Luminescent Moon sect was of the Ashenvale clan, a familiar young lady with a shockingly pale face. This was a younger sister of the Ashenvale clan pair. This young lady was technically an enemy, but Thessa couldn't bring herself to take her seriously in the slightest. Today, she had come here for the sake of entering the 4th level. She didn't care about anything else. However, that didn't stop her from being on full alert. Dristan's little brother, Varen, made sense. The Ironhearts had already extended an olive branch to the Nightingales, and were likely here to show their loyalty. But why were the Ashenvales here? Thessa sent a glance toward the young girl. She had an odd name, Oxon, they called her. It was a weirdly masculine name for such a fragile little girl. She must have been at least 16 or 17, given her strength, but she looked closer to 12 years old than anything else. Thessa only gave her a brief glance, wondering for the 3rd time already why this hadn't started yet. There should be no foul play. This branch was called the Nightingale Pagoda for a reason. If she had wanted, she could enter the fourth level just based on her status alone, but in this sensitive time, she couldn't easily do things like that. And then there was a rumble. Apologies, Princess Consort. There are an oddly high number of individuals who want to participate today, and I've been forced to arrange things. You should have told me you were visiting. We would have granted you a grand entrance and ceremony. Apologies again for the poor hospitality. An old man with vigorous vitality and ruddy, wrinkled skin strolled in with billowing robes of black and silver. He should have been the branch manager of this pagoda. Manager Yuan. Thessa opened her lips briefly to reply before closing them again. Behind the branch manager, another youth appeared, and her gaze couldn't help but sharpen. Theron. He appeared with that same gentle demeanor, a caring smile, a soft gaze. He was a handsome little man with an unassuming sort of sharpness to him, one that one would only notice after he decided to unsheathe at the slightest bit. Thessa shook her head and looked back to Manager Yuan. No, you don't have anything to apologize for, Manager Yuan. I came here today uninvited, but I would like to take on the same challenge as everyone else. Not a problem. Not a problem at all. What challenge would you like to take, Princess? The alchemy challenge, perhaps. A spirit mancer with fire mana control was maybe one of the most unique combinations in the world. Almost all secondary profession geniuses were born from soul mancers, and spirit mancers were their direct opposite. So, Thessa learning alchemy was akin to Theron ever mastering a weapon or martial art resonance. But in this case, Thessa's genius seemed to be shining through. No, that would be too boring, Thessa said calmly. I would like a trial by combat. Even Manager Yuan was taken aback, let alone the others. Didn't this mean that Thessa wanted to fight a Silvermancer for the right to enter the fourth level? At the Bronze Resonance? Impossible. The gap was too big, even if Thessa was at the quasi-silver level. Theron was the only one that didn't seem very surprised by this. Right now, he was functioning under the impression that the Nightingale clan knew that he was River, but that didn't mean that all of them knew. In addition, did it matter if they knew? Not acutely, it didn't. Daggers of a Night was a hidden pawn of the Nightingale clan, not an open one. They wouldn't easily tie these two things together until the time was right, or else Sadie wouldn't have to hide her identity. When Theron said he was walking a tightrope of life and death, he meant it with every fiber of his being. Manager Yuan seemed caught between a rock and a hard place, not knowing what to do. This was too dangerous to take a risk on, but he also didn't want to offend the princess consort. For now, he could only stall. This is unexpected. In that case, it will take some time to prepare a silver resonance mancer of the proper level. In the meantime, what do these other young geniuses want to do? I will take the mana density test, Varen replied. I will take the mana resistance test, Oxon said with a cute little smile. I plan to take the mana control test, Theron chimed in softly. I see. You're all quite different then. These tests are already prepared. You can start readying yourselves now. Give me a moment, please. Manager Yuan quickly left, leaving the youths and their handlers behind. They all seemed to have a protector except for Theron himself. Yet he seemed to be the calmest of them all. Theron. Oxon smiled brightly at him. Hello, Oxon. How have you been? I would have been better if someone didn't forget me, Oxon pouted. You just chatted up me and my sister, and then you disappeared, leaving us like whores by the side of the road. What happened to our words of love? Theron sighed on the inside. What words of love? What chatting up? All he had done was talk to them for a bit at the banquet. These sorts of words can't be said even as a joke anymore. Oxon, otherwise my fiancée might kill me. Thessa's eyes sharpened as her head snapped over, while Oxon nearly jumped out of her skin. Fiancé? Since when? Theron chuckled lightly, a hint of pride on his expression and the slightest blush on his face. It seems my words move the Vermouth clan. I will have Malaya's hand in marriage. Oxon's eyes opened wide. Disgusting. In the silence, the venomous words that seethed with a fiery menace were all too obvious. And, of course, they came from a certain princess consort. Theron didn't seem to react much to the words, but Oxan blinked so rapidly you'd think she might accidentally dry her eyes out. Her eyes bounced back and forth between Theron and Thessa. "Oh my, little Theron, don't tell me you have something going on with the princess consort? That's so dangerous, you bad boy. I could swear I smelled jealousy in the air." A flash of murderous rage sparked in Thessa's eyes. It seemed as though she might lash out at any moment. "I will be careful with your words, Oxan." Theron didn't say anything other than that, but his implication was clear. The last people to say such things about the princess consort ended up dead. And unlike them, Oxan wasn't supposedly best friends with this princess consort at all. She'd have even less qualms about killing her. There wasn't even the slightest hint of sarcasm in Theron's voice, and it sounded like he said it very seriously. Honestly, there wasn't the slightest hint of a fault to find against him. Even if there had been a noble of substantial power here, it was doubtful that even they would dare to act on this much alone. But that didn't stop Oxan from quickly covering her mouth like a giddy little girl, or from flames sparking in Thessa's hair. "I thought you were much better than this," Thessa said with a seething heat in her voice. Theron frowned, looking at Thessa in what was clear confusion. But this only made Thessa feel more infuriated. There was truly no fault to pick with Theron, but she had lost so much in these last few days, and now she was being treated like a fool. She was already teetering on an edge, and Theron seemed to be kicking at her back. "I'm sorry if I've offended you in any way." "Enough!" Thessa roared, her hair dancing in a fiery rain. She unsheathed a flaming sword, the air in the region superheating to the point that Thralix's younger cousin was forced to take several steps back. The young man had been quiet since everyone appeared, not that there had been much of a chance to speak. But it was clear that, unlike with Yanaway's death, the Iron Hearts were taking Thralix's far harder. He didn't even look like he wanted to be here. "Princess Consort, I have no intention of fighting you," Theron said seriously. "Bring out your weapon, coward," Thessa said through gritted teeth. "You can hide behind a woman, but you can't fight one? What sort of man are you?" Theron's frown deepened. "You can insult me if you'd like, but I won't be fighting any unsanctioned battles against a noble, least of all a princess consort. My life isn't worth enough, and I don't have any protectors to swoop in and save me at the last moment." Thessa's eyes spit fire. "Are you trying to say I'll need such a thing?" Theron didn't even know how to respond to such an irrational statement. Clearly he was speaking about protecting his own life, but after shaking his head inwardly, he was quite calm. "She's more unstable than I thought she'd be. The plan was to goad her, but it wasn't supposed to be so easy. Judging by her reaction during the banquet, it shouldn't be difficult to get her up in arms." This, though, made his job easier. "I'm saying I have no intention of dying because of a noble's temper." Theron showed a bit of a hard edge for the first time. "Do you think I need to rely on something like that? If you want a sanctioned battle, I will give it to you. Do you think you're someone now that you're marrying into the Vermouth clan? You're a shame to your parents. The only merit worth much of anything in life comes from yourself." "Yes." "Oh." Theron's gaze became icy cold. "And are you under the assumption that earldoms just marry their talented daughters off to any commoner? If a sanctioned fight is what you want, then it is what I will give you. 10 moves," he said. "If you can last through 10 moves of mine, you can have my head." Theron pivoted on his heel. A chilling aura surrounded him. The room should have been hot to the point of forcing even mansers like themselves to twist, and yet several felt as though goosebumps were gliding up and down their skin. Thessa felt some of the flames in her eyes cooling. The protector by her side suffered a slight twitch in his hand, but just barely managed to stop himself from drawing his weapon. "Princess, we are leaving." A voice pierced into Thessa's mind, waking her up. Thessa frowned. "No, Princess." Thessa took her hand away before it could be grabbed and marched after Theron, her fury returning. These people wanted to control everything about her life. She wouldn't have it. The protector could only watch, frowning. At this point, taking Thessa away by force would only make things worse. Gongs echoed through the Nightingale Pagoda. As one of the central economic hubs of the city, or rather the central hub, there were many more things to do here than just buy things. There was no way the pagoda wouldn't take such an opportunity. News of a marriage of the Vermouth clan's young princess had been spread almost artificially slowly, until it all suddenly exploded. Knowledge that the Nightingales thought they had strong control over spiraled, and soon as scenery was painted for the citizens of Thistlebrook. A princess consort looking to prove herself. A young commoner marrying into a clan far above his station. A man and a woman both pining for validation. It was an interesting story, to be sure. One made maybe all the more interesting by an underlying insinuation. Pining for validation? Or frustrated by their inability to control their own marriages. A woman promised to a prince she had hardly ever met. A man humiliated into marrying into a clan that wasn't his own. It sounded more like a fascinating love story twisted into a sickening plot of blood and vengeance. But neither of the two seemed very aware of the changes to the outside world. At the very least, Thessa would have no idea until it was far too late. As for Theron, he wasn't in the mood to consider how smooth his plans were going. The crowd's noise faded to Theron. He didn't even hear them, nor did he even see much of the arena itself. It had all faded away, and there was nothing else but a vague form before him. He couldn't see Thessa's beauty, or even the curving outline of her silhouette. He had forgotten about everything, until something triggered in his mind. Maybe after he was finished, he would recall that had been the judge's command to begin. But right now, even that had faded. He took a step forward. Bursting water shield took form, looming large and mighty. 3 water bullets formed behind it, curving forward and across blind spots. Fire and water clashed, but a water wrap formed from the shattered water bullets the instant they splashed into a pool by Thessa's feet. She was ripped into the air, a tendril wrapping her ankle. Bursting water shield shattered from an attack Theron hardly seemed to register, but the plumes of fire encased in water were sent spiraling in all directions. Thessa was tossed into the air by water wrap, just as Theron closed the final distance, his fists smashing in her face. The princess consort landed heavily out of the arena as the howls of the crowd faded into a silence. She twitched just once, her will alone seemingly wanting her to stand. Then she lost consciousness. Thessa wouldn't even know how to describe what happened. It was like from the start she never stood a chance. The judge's call fell, and her sword was already at the ready, blazing with flames. But Theron only took a single step before he vanished behind a wide wall of water. She didn't know if it was on purpose or not, but the reflections and refractions in the water screen made it look like he had split into 4 people. Without third eye, it was impossible for her to tell which was the real one, so she launched a powerful attack to shatter it. In the instant she made the decision, she regretted it. 3 water bullets had curved around her blind spots, and she had been so focused on figuring which was the real Theron that she almost hadn't noticed. Having poured out a large amount of mana to ensure she could shatter the screen before Theron got close, she was forced to use her blade alone to parry the bullets. But because of that, she didn't feel that the diversions they took while gliding along her blade were off. They all landed in the same puddle behind her, and it was then that maybe the most shocking thing happened. Thessa had never considered that bursting water shield wasn't an illusion method, but rather a defensive technique. Changing the reflections in the water like that required a level of control she couldn't fathom. It wasn't something that the consummate barrier alone could explain. Theron had practically overhauled the technique. It was something that would only work on bronze cores, but that was precisely why it was so shocking. He had casually manipulated the technique to suit the battle he was in currently, uncaring for anything else. And he had done it as easily as breathing. This alone was already shocking enough. But taking control of spent mana, reaffirming one's connection with it after it had splashed away, and then using that very same mana to form a new spell to cast, that was something that she could only do because she was a spirit mancer. It was because she had spirit mana that she could control even the spent embers of her flames as though they were extensions of her body. And technically, it was because the flames went out, not her spirit mana itself, that she could do that. That wasn't something Theron should be able to do. Something like taking the mana from 3 water bullets and pooling them together to form Water rap, right in the middle of battle, was impossible. She wasn't a fool, nor had she lost her head. How could she ignore the water bullets that fell behind her so easily if she thought it was possible they could be a threat? At the very least, she would rush forward to avoid them. The thought simply never crossed her mind. In the very same instant her blade of fire was swallowed up by bursting water shield and split into countless streams of flames like meteors falling from the skies, she felt it wrap around her ankle. Theron burst through her attack, unblemished, and appeared before her as she was flipped through the air, her body flailing. From start to finish, she didn't even get the chance to gather mana for a second attack, too obsessed with trying to use the mana Theron had dispersed with bursting water shield to attack him from the back and catch him off guard like she had with Thralix. It was useless. The scent of death filled her head, and she felt a blade slice across her neck. Those chilling eyes were the last thing she saw, until a fist appeared and smashed against her fair little nose. Her beauty collapsed and distorted, a feeling of humiliation and pain causing her eyes to water as her skull practically deformed beneath the blow. As poor as the bodies of elemental mancers were, the bodies of spirit mancers weren't that much better, if at all. Only those that followed specific unique paths would be able to shore up that weakness. And Thessa certainly wasn't one of them. She was sent flying off the stage. 3 moves were all it took. Even if you counted the water bullet morphing into water rap as 2, it was still just 4. It was a complete dismantling. Blood trickled down Thessa's neck and collarbone, not coming from her nose or broken row of teeth, but rather from the blade that had almost run across her neck. Nui. Theron stood on the stage for a few short breaths before he exhaled and turned to leave. He had almost killed her. He had really thought about it. And unlike with her pitiful attempt against Thralix, he could have succeeded. He truly didn't care about what others said about him. But mentioning his parents, the chilliness in the depths of his eyes deepened. A frosty cold was drawn into his necklace silently before the crowd erupted once again. But by then, Theron had already long vanished. A shadow flashed by and picked the princess consort up, quickly vanishing into the distance. It looked down at the wound on Thessa's neck, a tremor erupting in its heart. Just a moment of carelessness was enough to decide far too much. Sadie stood on a viewing platform high above the arena, her head covered in a cloak as she exhaled a breath. She had really thought that Theron would kill Thessa, but her eyes dimmed. She wasn't sure what to think these days anymore. He is dangerous, princess. He is useful, Sadie said calmly. Daggers of the Night hasn't been under our full control in too long. He can change things. He can never be trusted. You will just replace one problem with another. Sadie didn't reply for a long while. What had you found out about what happened to his family? You know that for your father to suppress such a thing, it is beyond our means. Is it beyond our means? Or is the time just too sensitive for him to stick his neck out? This servant is not at liberty to speculate. I only think that if we should rely on anyone to corral Daggers of the Night, it should be Princess. I will, she said as though it was only a matter of fact. But the Gale lineage is my ultimate goal. After some thought, she pulled the necklace she wore off of her neck and handed it to the servant. Princess, it has nothing to do with Windmancy. I must keep looking. Theron walked into the 4th level calmly, his breathing having returned to normal. He didn't like to lose control of his temper. Honestly, he couldn't remember many instances of having done so. The last time, he remembered a memory from his 3rd day in the Daggers of the Night camp. It wasn't something he liked to recall, something that reminded him of how cold he could be when he stopped caring. The weight of living for something other than yourself sounded nice, but it was also that weight that sank you to the bottom of an abyss. He was smart enough to be aware of it, but uncaring enough to disregard it. Whether he truly became a monster or not. Theron shook his head, his focus returning. He hadn't just come to the 4th level to goad Thessa. So after he defeated her, he went straight to complete his mana control exam and continued up. It just so happened that this would be a nice cover for his actions. It was already quite weird of him to ask to sit in on the 4th year botany class. But if he was found perusing silver resonance herbs as well, the second oddity might start raising eyebrows. The only people that would be so interested in herbs were alchemists and potion makers of the like. If Theron, who had no real path to becoming one, suddenly became so interested in herbs, it would raise eyebrows. Even if they didn't make the connection with the verdant bloomstone, they might think him to have some sort of alchemy recipe he felt the need to hide. The worst part was that with the ways of the cultivation world, even if someone wasn't smart enough to guess at any of this, just the speculation alone could put him in danger. His interest in the botany class could be waved away because of his previous infatuation with academics. Clearing that class now would also make several prerequisites far easier. But right now he was aware that he was walking a fine line, a line that he had always walked perfectly. Hours later, Theron left the tower with a cultivation method he had wasted all of his bronzes on. His pockets were completely empty, and he had spent them on what was ultimately a worthless technique to him. But to Theron, when there was time to take risks, he would take them. When it was time to be cautious, however, no one would be more cautious than himself. I should have them all now, he thought to himself. But this final one is not quite right. Theron had run into a problem he had expected long ago. Verdant bloomstone had fallen out of favor long ago, though it was still very useful for passing on coded messages. Because it was so out of circulation, very few used it for that either. Due to this verdant bloomstone was almost certainly imprinted a very, very long time ago. Depending on how long ago that was, it was possible that the region had undergone sweeping changes since then. This could mean two things. First, the location that this verdant bloomstone wanted to direct him to might likely already be compromised or changed beyond recognition. And second, the herbs used to imprint the code might have evolved, mutated, or even gone extinct since then. The good news was that up until this final herb, this latter problem hadn't been an issue. But it seemed that the final herb had, indeed, mutated somewhat. The scent was close enough that Theron was sure they were related, but not close enough that they were identical. And that meant that his code might be off unless he could figure out exactly what it had evolved from. When Theron had this thought, though, he calmed down. If that was the case, then the solution was easy. Whatever the answer is will likely be the only one that makes sense. I don't need to find a potentially extinct plant. I just need to look up all the plants it could have evolved from and then decode them one by one, swapping in a new one every time the decoding is a failure. Whichever one makes it make sense in the end is the correct one. Renault's section. There was a small chance that there would be multiple solutions, but that would be a very small chance. The solution was close. Soon he would know where this verdant bloomstone was pointing him and what it had to do with echoes. Theron slowly closed a book in the depths of the Imperial Academy library. His eyes closed along with it. He leaned back in his chair, feeling the moonlight beaming in from a high, slanted window on the ceiling. The world seemed to have nothing at all to do with him. He was sure that there was a great deal of commotion after he defeated Thessa so easily, and there would certainly be problems that came with it, but he had a knack for ignoring troubles. The calm rhythm of his heart made his thoughts flow smoother. I see. It's not the entire smell I need. Sometimes it's only part of the herb. That changes the calculations. He shifted his thoughts again. There were 3 possible ways to solve this. The simplest was a word puzzle, rearranging the names, letters, or syllables of the herbs themselves until the solution was found. The second most difficult code was the pill code. Using the arrangement of herbs, you would divide them into the pills they could forge, and then use the properties of the pills themselves to decipher what the verdant bloomstone pointed you toward. The most difficult code was the mana type. In this case, you needed to find a solution by understanding the way your mana would interact with a field of these herbs arranged in a very specific pattern. Of course, that pattern was also hidden within the verdant bloomstone. Theron had expected it to be the first and simplest form. It wasn't. Yet, all that meant was a few extra hours for him. Merely an hour before dusk, he opened his eyes. It seemed Vibra's class was more helpful than he ever thought it could be. HM? Interesting. Why is a first year so interested in herbs? Theron looked up calmly to find a figure he had been looking for. Kai, Yanaway's good friend. Theron knew exactly who Kai was. He also knew that it wasn't necessarily a good thing that this person of all people had found him here. But he also had the mood of someone who had already expected this. After all, he had been looking for him. How could Theron sit here with a book that could potentially be a weakness to him for hours on end just waiting for someone to find him if there wasn't a purpose to it? Theron's gaze shifted down to Kai's uniform. Visitors to the Imperial Academy are only allowed on campus 3 hours from now. You also have to register and aren't allowed into this region of the library. Ho-ho, a real stickler for rules, is that it? Kai smiled, his gaze a bit venomous. Do you think it's easy to sneak into the Imperial Academy? If I'm here, there's a pretty good reason for it, don't you think? How high up do you think the person who let me in had to be? Go on and take a wild guess. It's actually very easy to sneak into the academy. The guards are lax because no one dares to disrespect the crown or try and sneak into a place that has the highest concentration of gold mancers in the entire city. Theron slowly stood to his feet as Kai's eyes narrowed. The latter was quickly realizing that intimidation wasn't going to work. My guess, Theron said calmly, is that Sawyer let you in. These days, even if the guards did see you, because there was a thistle walking beside you, they would have turned a blind eye. Kai's pupils constricted into pinholes. You know, fools like Sawyer are very predictable. All I had to do was step out of the fourth-year botany class once in front of him, and I knew he'd go running his mouth to you. Chi! Kai froze as a blade ran right into his chest, slipping through a small sliver between his heart and lungs. He tried to retreat, but tendrils of mana sunk into his body, making him realize that any movement would cause it to explode. If you came, then it would certainly mean that you did know about the verdant bloomstone. If you didn't, then I'd just let you live. But to think you'd take such a big risk on a small sliver of chance. Let me guess, my battle with Thessa is what tipped you off. If I could defeat her so easily, Yanaway would clearly not be a problem for me. And since my soon-to-be marriage with a vermouth is so public now, you know that I'm in bed with the Thistles as well. So there's a minor chance I just might be related to Yanaway's death. Either way, this jade is so important to you that even for such a small chance, you would definitely take the risk. Kai's eyes opened wide, but he couldn't say a word. You certainly have a unique vantage point on things. It's too bad that it's meaningless. The luminescent sect disciple grit his teeth. Are you very angry? Maybe you have the right to be. The Thistles have many powerful warriors, but they birthed someone as useless as Sawyer who didn't understand when he was being used. I guess it is a good thing I didn't kill him so soon. Sawyer's jealousy was easily manipulated. So long as he knew that Theron had leapfrogged everyone to enter a fourth-year class, and he was still trying to ingratiate himself with Kai in hopes of using the sect to make up for his lost credits. News of this would certainly reach Kai. Theron had actually planned to sit in this library until dawn for several nights in a row. Who would have thought he would only need to waste 2 days? Luckily, I didn't waste my time. It seems that you'll be more useful than I thought. Kai's screams filled the air. Unfortunately, no one would hear him. By the time the sun came up, Kai was no more. There was one thing Byrne was very right about. Watermancers were quite good at cleaning. Theron wasn't much of a talker. The only reason he had said so much was because it was a type of psychological torture tactic. If he wanted the information he got, he had to pressure not just Kai's body, but his mind as well. With grave, torture was unsurprisingly not a part of the tenets of an assassin. He placed Kai's body within a spatial device and put it into his pocket before strolling out of the library. The first rays of sunlight had yet to even descend. So that is the story? I didn't expect the luminescent moon sect to have such a storied history. Is that why they are so interested in it? Or is it just sects in general that all have such histories? Theron wasn't sure. What he did know was that the luminescent moon sect was far from the strongest sect in the province. That was the Obsidian Eclipse sect that formed a trifecta with Daggers of the Night and the Imperial clan as the strongest powers. But if that was the case, why send the princess consort to the luminescent moon sect instead? Unless they were already confident in controlling the Obsidian Eclipse sect? Luminescent moon, Obsidian Eclipse, what an interesting dichotomy. According to Kai, Yanaway was trying everything to improve his foundation so that he could make a huge push into the silver resonance, hopefully positioning himself to be strong enough to fight for Chosen when the time came. Amongst outer disciples, he was easily amongst the top 3 in strength and was well on his way to achieving his goals. Thanks to that, he was able to enter what they knew as the luminescent realm. Deep within it, they found the remnants of an ancestor and barely managed to survive on the way out. The way Kai described it, it still didn't make sense to him that they managed to keep their lives. It was almost like the ancestor let them leave or even escorted them out. However, after coming out, they couldn't understand the verdant bloomstone at all. So, they started looking through historical records, which was where they learned about bloomstones. The bloomstone was a family of jades, of which verdant was just a single type. The bloomstone, though, was born beneath the light of the moon, nurtured by it, and grew from it. According to the history of the luminescent moon sect, they had created an entire cultivation system reliant on this, and maybe the most shocking method, allowed one to use the moon as a substitution or an enhancement to the echo pill, giving the user the ability to fuse with beast souls far beyond their means. Thessa startled awake, jolting upward. An ache in her face made the blurriness in her consciousness fade much faster than usual. In fact, rather than fading, it felt like a boulder had crashed into her as a wave of adrenaline poured into her veins like masses of green tendrils. Wiggling vascularity pumped across her, her body tensing. But very quickly, it was clear that it wasn't just the pain responsible for this. Her head had already snapped in a certain direction, her body tightening further as she saw a familiar young man sitting by a windowsill. The best way he could be described was so handsome it almost hurt. His skin was almost sickly, but it worked so well with his sharp features and dark hair and eyes that it was easily overlooked. He was the sort of young man in his early 20s that women and teenage girls would swoon over, but he was also the man that Thessa least wanted to be in a room alone with. Crown Prince, Etherean Nightingale. Confusion clouded her mind more than the pain ever could have. He wasn't supposed to be here. He was supposed to be very, very far away, focused on something he would deem far more important than her in the capital somewhere. There was so much turmoil, so many things to focus on with that land so far away. The last thing he should have had time to do was come to see her. The worst part was that this was the nicest way she could have put it. Come here to see her? No, it was more like put her in her place, remind her of what she was to him, not who. You're awake. He spoke in a calm, deep voice. Thessa didn't know what to say, her voice losing itself in her throat as though falling into a maze of darkness. You did well killing those two. I'll let their families go. Thessa's breathing hitched. She wanted to feel some sort of relief, some sort of happiness that she had managed to do at least something for them before their lives were ruined for no other reason than association with her. However, your loss today was unacceptable. Losing is fine. Losing in such disgraceful fashion, though. And there it was. She couldn't breathe again, her hitched breath rolling into a ball in her throat. The lump grew larger, and the cry of tears seemed on the verge of spilling forth. Then he looked over. Those eyes were like 2 swirling abysses, a depth of dark mana she couldn't begin to fathom bearing down on her. But I will let it go. Today, you lost to a man. So long as you're the best woman in the world, it changes nothing to me. The situation has been handled for you. Then came the waves of confusion once again, an up and down, a volatile storm of emotions. That was the only way to describe every interaction she had ever had with this man. His words were sickening down to her very core. Who cared if Theron was a man? She wanted to win. She wanted to put him in his place for what he had done, for what he was doing to Malaya, for what he was doing to little Sadie, who had been a complete mess to console these last few days. What were his words, if not a reminder? Even when it seemed he was being kind to her, he was doing nothing more than putting her in her place, reminding her that she was meant to be a wife to the Emperor in the future and nothing more. A with grave baites. Her skill now, the efforts she put into cultivation, all the blood and sweat she shed for what she thought was herself, would only go toward building up his image, his ego, his legacy. There was nothing in this life built for her and her alone. For the next few days you will remain here and recover your face. Heal well. After this, we will make an appearance together." After saying these words, the prince turned and left, not even so much as saying goodbye. Thessa sat in her bed listlessly, not knowing what to say or do. In the end, she almost cried once more. Almost. With a slow push, she ebbed her way off the bed. Her legs wobbled, and she realized that she must have suffered more than just a broken face. Her brain was most definitely in a terrible state, and she had a severe concussion. However, she still stood, her gown falling to her shins as she finally stood with the help of the bed and a side table. Every step was another wobbling sort of torture, the ligaments and tendons of her legs bowing and crying as she tried to force herself to stabilize. She didn't know how many minutes it took, but she finally crossed the room, making it to the door. Train. She needed a train. Her sword needed to be faster, her spirit mana control stronger. She needed to. She opened the door, and a pair of backs stood in her way. Both cloaked figures looked back at the same time, but only a single one of them spoke. "Please return to your bed, Princess Consort. You must rest for these coming days. The prince has ordered that you must return to your best condition for the coming public appearance. You are his wife-to-be, after all." Thessa didn't know what it was. They were kind words, all things considered. These men would probably never dare to harm her or say a harsh word to begin with. But neither of the two were cloaked figures that she was used to. That man had certainly already died. And for what? Because she lost a battle? Because she didn't listen to him when he said not to go? That Theron was too dangerous? The tears she had held back returned in a flood. She tried to fall to the ground, but even that wasn't allowed. Her arms were caught, and she was slowly put back into bed. The last thing she heard before her wails took over her soul once again was the clicking of yet another door closing. Theron heard about the rumors the next day, and honestly, he had to admit that it was a good play, a nice angle to use. He hadn't well and truly thought about it, something rare even for him. He never really saw men and women as much different. He didn't have much experience in the matter despite his mother trying to drill him with things since he was young. On top of that, his first real-world experience with the opposite sex had come from many of them trying to kill him. Other than the women in his family, he had never truly thought to treat the so-called fairer sex much differently at all. The way he saw things, that was a recipe to get yourself killed. The only woman he had somewhat treated differently, Sadie, had also ended up grabbing onto his greatest weakness before he even realized it. She had reminded him so much of his little sister that he couldn't help himself. But such a thing only made the way he viewed things even colder. He was sure that before they died, Tegan and Soren never thought that it was Thessa that would take their lives. But now, buried 6 feet deep, it was far too late for them to regret that slip-up in judgment. This was just the way of the world, but it seemed that there were too many people eager to ignore that, judging by the looks he was getting on the way to class. Looks filled with disdain, disgust, and most of all avoidance, as though even those that might understand wouldn't want to touch him with a 10-foot pole. It seemed that he had finally been outplayed, and not even truly by intelligence, but by someone with far more life experience than his own. Before he even heard the rumors, he understood what it was. By the time he sat down in class, he had heard enough whispers. A violent man, a woman beater, a bundle of raging testosterone that didn't know how to be kind to the fair sex. It was a label that was quite easy to stick on a man. If Theron had been any older, it would have likely been even worse. After sitting down, Theron closed his eyes. He sensed Sawyer walk in, and he shut off all his senses. If things are going like this, something would certainly be said to set him off. He didn't want to hear it. If he did, a head would fly, and at that point, what realms of control he did have over the situation would be ruined. So he didn't hear what Sawyer said at all. He didn't feel the looks of vitriol or the venom-laced words clearly backed by the fear of an unknown. Sawyer knew that Kai had gone to see Theron, and now Kai was gone. It could be that Kai had simply left after using him, but there was another possibility, a possibility that Theron had made him disappear. It wasn't a possibility that Sawyer was willing to accept, but his bodily responses didn't care about his ego. The more fear he felt, the harsher his words became, The more overbearing the commotion, he caused as though he was afraid others would hear. He was truly a fool. He didn't even realize that insulting Theron now was like spitting in the face of his own Thistle clan. A true fool amongst fools. And then Theron felt something touch him. His eyes snapped forward, the words lingering in the air, finally piercing to him. Your mother would have been ashamed to have raised such a barbaric beast, and yet you don't even dare to open your mouth and defend her. You sicken me. Theron's eyes opened, and a murderous intent he had suppressed spread out in all directions. Sawyer's words caught in his throat as he stumbled back, but the death that Theron had been willing to grant just now was restrained when he recognized the palm on his forearm. RNO. He looked to his side. Malaya, the Vermouth clan princess, had been avoiding him for many days now. He didn't really care, but the last thing he expected was to see her suddenly take a seat by his side. Malaya grabbed onto Theron's arm as though she was afraid he might pull away and make this situation even more embarrassing for her. She didn't say a word and sat there as ripe as a tomato, but Theron seemed to forget the words that had just entered his ears. The red from Theron's eyes receded, and he sat there in silence. After a long while, he looked away from Malaya's blushing face, took her hand, and closed his eyes once more, shutting out the rest of the class. Malaya's head lowered, her ears practically emitting steam. But as time went on, she too calmed down. You must have killed him. You must have killed him. Sawyer fell to his ass, pointing at Theron as though he had lost his mind. But the smell of urine filling the air made the noses of many twitch. All of a sudden, their attention was on Sawyer, their faces twisting with the same disgust and disdain. Sawyer couldn't even be bothered to deal with them, his incoherence growing worse and worse until he suddenly vanished. It was unknown what power ripped him out of class, but what everyone did know was that Sawyer was never seen again. Deep in the Thistle mansion, his soul lamp blinked out. The Thistles had suffered far too much embarrassment that day to allow it to continue. That afternoon, as the noise of rancor against Theron increased, he was unsurprisingly called into Dean Thistle's office. Give me one very good reason why I shouldn't kill you. Just one will suffice, the dean said calmly. Maybe because while you're busy blaming a 14-year-old for you being outmaneuvered by the Nightingale clan, he found your son's killer. Theron threw the verdant Bloomstone onto the desk. I've really grown tired of this back and forth. If you want to kill me, then just kill me. You're a man who supposedly rose up to patriarch on your own, but you need me to think out every little detail for you. The verdant Bloomstone rattled on the table, spinning until it came to a stop. Dean Thistle's gaze sharpened. He didn't recognize the jade immediately, but very few would. Still, his knowledge as a high-level cultivator was certainly extensive. While it took him a moment, the instant the scent hit his nose, obscure memories rolled in one after another. Theron saw it when it appeared, that moment of agitation, of recognition, of undying greed. For a cultivator at this level to lose his cool like this, Theron knew that he had grasped onto the perfect weakness. Almost nothing else would matter precisely because this Bloomstone had appeared. Dean Thistle regained his calm with shocking efficiency. As he reached forward to pick up the jade, it was as though he didn't know what it was at all. He flipped it in his palm, looking at it from all angles. Verdant Bloomstone. What does this have to do with my son's death? And Dean Thistle's gaze sharpened as he looked back up. How does the likes of you even know that I lost a son? You have fools like Sawyer in your clan. Is there a need for me to explain? Dean Thistle didn't reply, looking back down at the verdant Bloomstone. Who killed Yanaway? Kai. Impossible, Dean Thistle said indifferently, his suspicions blaring. Then you might want to ask yourself why this fool came to hound me for no reason other than reading books on herbs. The sound of squishing liquid and flesh resounded as a head fell onto Dean Thistle's table. It was none other than Kai. So your suspect is dead? The sneer in his tone was practically palpable. Don't you have a spirit mancer by your side? Use him. Or could it be that I need to explain to you how to do this as well? Your tone is getting quite big, boy, and your family has given me absolutely nothing despite what I've given them. If your plan is to string me along and then kill me when you feel I've grown too strong, then you might as well kill me now. Do you think I'm a fool? Ao Thailand bot. I gathered 3 B scores perfect for the youths of your family. And what did I receive in return? 3 mid-tier bronze resonance pills when I was already in the high tier? The ability to sit in on a class I was going to be able to sit in on given another few months anyway? How useful you've been. Dean Thistle's eyes narrowed, and he looked over to Byrne, who turned stiff but didn't dare to meet his gaze. The patriarch didn't say a word in reply as he continued to observe the jade. At the very least, not related to Theron's complaints. But that was as good as an acknowledgement. The reason so many sect disciples had appeared in Thistlebrook was for no other reason than to clear out the sect and make things easier to search for. Originally, Sigil had been meant to enter the sect during this time as well, but the plans on this side needed more stabilization after Yanaway died, so that was tabled for the moment. Dean Thistle had expected that it would take a great deal of time to get everything sorted, but he didn't expect that what he had been looking for all this time would fall into his lap like this. How will you deal with this situation? Me? I don't have the resources of a noble clan. What do you expect me to do to combat public sentiment? They managed to twist a battle I was challenged to by another cultivator into bullying a woman. Half of the city hates me by default, and another 40% either want nothing to do with me or are disdainful. I bet that very soon, this princess consort's husband-to-be will make an appearance, or maybe a statement. If he's as smart as it seems, it will definitely be the former. He's just waiting for his fiancée's pretty face to heal. At that point, my reputation will be set in stone. In fact, very soon, rumors of how I forced Malaya into marriage will certainly start to spread, building up to the day of their appearance, where I'm sure this crown prince will challenge me to a duel for the sake of his fiancée's face. I will inevitably reject, because I have no intention of fighting a gold mancer for your sake, nor should you want that. If I die, you gain nothing and lose far more. You've said a lot, Dean Thistle responded indifferently, still studying the jade. What is the solution? It was like he hadn't heard Theron's insults at all. Before I give you the solution, how are you going to compensate me? A dangerous light flashed in the Dean's eyes. You're playing a dangerous game. The game's been dangerous ever since I completed those 21 credits. But you're free to use my plan B if you want. Kill me, and then blame the Nightingale clan, spread tales of how they failed me in my youth, allowing my parents to be killed under their watch, and that bred my hatred, only for them to kill me silently in the dark for fighting back. It's a good plan, don't you think? The Dean's gaze shot up, a shuddering pressure descending on Theron. I've grown tired of the childish games, he said coldly. Don't be mad at me for reading you. You're predictable, and that's no one's fault but your own. That's why you were outmaneuvered this time. You think that you're the only smart person in the room, and contrary to your overinflated sense of worth, you only got here with everyone kissing your ass. Now do you want to hear a real plan or not? A wild grin spread across Dean Thistle's face. I can't wait to kill you, he said coldly. Theron's hair fluttered, his true expression slipping into being as his face became frighteningly cold. You had better cut the line early, or I'll be holding your head instead. Theron left the Dean's office with an indifferent expression on his face. What need was there to be worried? He knew that Dean Thistle couldn't kill him, not right after so publicly promising him to Malaya. After losing the Iron Hearts, making the precious daughter of one of his staunchest allies a widow was not acceptable. Though the plan B seemed smart, there were too many holes in it. It required straining relationships that couldn't afford to be strained. It wasn't just a matter of Earl Vermouth either, but also Malaya's elder brother. There was no secret how much he loved his little sister, but more importantly than that, he was a key cog in the Luminescent Moon sect. Even if their father was able to swallow the disrespect and anger, Aaron would become a wild card. Having such an important piece who might not listen at a critical time was unacceptable. It seemed that Theron was using Malaya, and that he was. But in his opinion, especially after recent changes, this weakness that he had given the Thistles was just a weakness to him. To them, however, he had them by the balls. It seems I have a wedding to prepare for, Theron thought indifferently. His body was just about recovered, too. It was about time he returned to Daggers of the Night to see what he could do to shake up the situation even more. Giving up the verdant Bloomstone was a great risk, and that it was. but he was confident in himself, even if no one else was. This matter would work out. In fact, his plan had gone from a 70% chance of success to 80%. So what if they were noble clans? They would fall to his palms just the same. Pa, Dean, we can't do this. I agree with the boy for once. Let's just kill him and use his death as a flashpoint. Dean Thistle didn't even look up from the verdant bloomstone. He could hear the seething tone in Burns' voice, and he knew that this spirit manser of his wanted to kill Theron all the more now, especially after the words just spoken. Instead, a head flew over. Look to see what you can find from the remnants of his soul. Burn wanted to argue, but he didn't dare to. Soon, his spirit mana had moved, and he began to look through Kai's soul. He paused. Dean, the soul is far too damaged to get more than a few fragments. But there's a soul-tie jade here, very well hidden. Dean Thistle's eyes narrowed, and he looked up. Looked through it. Right away, Burns' expression changed several times over the next few seconds. He went through the soul-tie jade even faster than before. When he snapped out of it, he was shaken. What did you find? Daggers of the night. In the end, that was the only thing that he could get out, but it was enough for Dean Thistle's eyes to shoot up. How did you miss this, Burn? He finally said coldly. The reason he said it was impossible for it to be Kai was because Kai was the very first person they investigated. But on top of the fact that Kai was a flex mancer and not a fire mancer, he had been squeaky clean. Patriarch, Burn hurried to defend himself. The first instinct of a soul tie holder is to destroy everything. It's suspicious that anything was left at all. Yeah? And what do you suggest happened? Burn didn't know what to say. It was impossible to plan a soul tie jade so expertly unless you were a spirit mancer. A soul mancer was a close second. Plus, where would the soul tie jade have come from in the first place? They had already checked, and Theron wasn't of Daggers of the Night. If Burn said Theron definitely planted it, he was either admitting he misdiagnosed Theron the first time, or Kai this time. Then there was Sawyer. The one who killed Sawyer was none other than Burn personally after receiving the Dean's order. He had, of course, checked Sawyer's soul for the memories, especially since he had been saying such odd things before he died. Sawyer had been an obvious flaw in Theron's plans, and the oddities had made them doubt Theron once again. In truth, when Theron came here today, Dean Thistle had already decided to kill him. It had been obvious to Burn that Theron had manipulated Sawyer into drawing Kai near him. And in the end, that had obviously cost Kai's life. But this all also meant something else. Theron had sensed something odd about Kai's obsession with herbs and somehow took advantage. Unfortunately, this wasn't enough to prove that Theron was already aware of the verdant bloomstone ahead of time. The group of three, that being Sawyer, Kai, and Yanaway, had bullied Theron before in the past. That was part of their due diligence on Theron. Who knew if Kai had let something slip at some point because of that? On top of that, there was also news that Theron had once been close with Thessa and those disciples of the Luminescent Moon sect as well. There were simply too many ways a boy as intelligent as Theron could have picked up the clues he needed. You're dismissed, Burn. Burn paled. Have Sierra replace your teaching duties for now. You've been working for me for a long while, and you've grown tired. Take a vacation. I will call you when I need you. Burn took a breath. Understood, Dean. Bowing his head, Burn then turned and left. Dean Thistle didn't seem to notice the departure. His fiery eyes locked onto the verdant bloomstone. This would change everything. Burn slowly walked out of the building, taking deep, slow breaths to calm himself. Out of a job, the spirit mancer's gaze sharpened, his head snapping toward Theron, who leaned on a pillar. Enjoy retirement, old man. Maybe you can use your extra time to learn how to clean stuff up yourself. Contract a broom or something and get to sweeping. After saying these words, Theron left. Burn stood there, clenching his fists so hard blood trickled down his wrinkles. Theron dashed through a forest, his expression calm. His former arrogance seemed to have vanished into thin air. As much fun as that character was to play, it wasn't him. It just made those elders think that he had more weaknesses to exploit than he actually did. His emotions were just the same as always. He rarely got too high or too low. The only real weakness he had was mention of his parents, but after slipping up that way once, he refused to allow himself to do it again. These last few days could be considered the first time since his parents' death that anyone had used them to attack him. It had caught him off guard and his body reacted on its own. He had almost killed Thessa, and if not for Malaya, he would have certainly killed Sawyer. But what he did best was adapt. That wasn't a button he would allow others to push again. Who cared if he got revenge for what an unrelated party said about his parents if he died, before he could make the person that killed them pay dearly? What were words to the graves where his parents were buried right now? His innocent little sister? The more Theron thought, the calmer he became and the smoother his blood flowed. An odd feeling of lightness overcame him and his steps felt faster. His blood moved through his veins faster, and though his heartbeat became slower, it was at the expense of becoming more efficient. It all happened subconsciously, and suddenly he was moving faster. Theron didn't seem to notice the change, but there was a slight glow to his necklace once again as he accelerated. His speed just barely touched onto the threshold of silvermancy before he noticed that he was fatiguing himself faster than usual. It was only when Theron realized his breath had become more labored than he remembered that he finally raised an eyebrow. What happened? The odd state vanished, and his body went back to normal. He hadn't thought much of it, because he thought that he was dealing with Vainsong again. But that didn't quite feel like Vainsong. Theron realized that he couldn't just wait here, so he started to move again. This time, he felt a slight tick up in his physical abilities as he moved, but it wasn't exaggerated enough for it to be noticed normally. If Theron wasn't paying so much attention, he wouldn't have thought much of it at all. Truly odd. There was one thing that was for certain. Vainsong had gotten stronger, and he didn't need to slip back into it again to confirm that. He almost knew innately. Was it because of his training with the old man? That didn't seem like it was the case either. I'll be needing it. Now isn't the time to test it out. Theron accelerated again, dancing and darting around. He fought a few feral beasts on the way, making short work of them even if they were deep into the 9th bronze resonance. The more he fought these existences, though, the more he wondered just how the gap between bronze and silver resonance was so large. He had felt undefeatable in bronze resonance, so long as there was rain ever since he was in the 3rd resonance. But he still didn't feel like he could take on someone at silver resonance, even at the 8th resonance now. Is third eye really such a huge deal? It didn't feel like a power gap. It felt like a control and reaction gap that he couldn't bridge. Does gold resonance have such a gap as well? It was an odd thought for Theron to have. Usually, he wouldn't consider something so far into the future. Ever since he began to cultivate, he found himself changing, but it was hard to tell if this was because of the cultivation or because he was slowly adapting to what life without family felt like. Thailand bot. From a young man wrapped in warmth every day, he was thrown into a world of chilling cold. There was nothing but damp chill around him, almost humid, but lacking in any of the warmth. That was his world now. How could he not change? Theron tapped a foot on a branch and fluttered down, landing in a vast expanse of nothingness. Up ahead, there was a familiar old man sitting at a stone table. The ravaged lands that he had left in waste just days earlier had been tidied up to the point that it was perfectly fine. Slowly, the old man looked up from the table. His expression was placid and cold, impossible to read. It was the face he put on when he was the least predictable. The sort of face he used when he just might kill any moment now. "Why exactly should I not kill you?" he asked. "Believe it or not, that's the second time tonight someone has asked me that question," Theron said as though he hadn't just been threatened. "Do you think I'm that easy to use?" Theron blinked as though he was confused. "Aren't you the one who said, 'I was under your protection now'?" The old man's eyes narrowed. Facing that gaze, Theron felt as though tiny razor blades were cutting across his cheeks and neck. It wasn't suffocating like the Dean's aura, but that was because he could hardly sense it at all. This was the aura of an assassin. "They will know," the old man finally said. "I'm sure you have a method to kill him without his soul lamp going out." The old man said nothing. "This will be the last time. Do something like this again, and I won't be so kind. I can't promise that. Rescind your promise first, and then I will gladly take a step back. Or maybe you're confident in finding someone else that can learn Songful Blade and Blood Escape in 3 days." The old man didn't reply, tapping his teacup. The ripple of sound was sharp and almost grating despite being so acute. Byrne had already turned to run, pushing himself to his absolute limits. Even his wrinkles had flattened against his face, the fear in his gaze palpable. He wasn't fast enough. His legs continued to move, but his head had long fallen from his shoulders. Theron didn't take long to find Byrne's corpse. He slipped a spatial device off of his finger, but he didn't even get the chance to go through it before it vanished from his hands. He didn't even have to look up to know that it was the old man. It seemed that he wouldn't be getting any freebies today, but that much was fine by him. Theron had known that after taunting Byrne, the man wouldn't be able to help himself. A good dog would always be eager to please his master, and even more eager to make up for any mistakes he had made. To Byrne, the only way to fix things was by proving that Theron was every bit the danger he assumed him to be. So this time, Theron wasn't as cautious as he usually was. He just pretended to be and then slipped out of the academy. Honestly, though, that was the easy part. Theron walked back to the old man. "How'd you find this place?" he asked coldly. Clearly, the old man was still upset. "You're the one who told me you had a rare mana-born echo from a Soundmancy beast. After that, it was easy. You managed to remember the route in such detail. I think that's the least impressive thing I did, actually. I deciphered the distortions and built out the true route from the illusion. Then I knew you would sense me enter your domain and make your way here to help me deal with this little problem. You realized that you weakened the distortions so that I could actually follow you? Yes, I know that. That's why I was confident in finding this place." The old man found himself feeling slightly annoyed. Theron spoke about these things as though it was easy, but he wasn't just remembering a path down a road. He was remembering the specific mana fluctuations in the air and then deciphering them after the fact. He reoriented his inner ear through a memory alone, adjusting what his mind had once thought were rights to lefts and vice versa. It was like going back through a fever dream. While it was true the old man had weakened his abilities so that Theron could actually keep up and follow him, this was still not just a small shock to him. Somehow, he had still underestimated this young man. "Tell you what, if you're still upset, you can always give me another impossible mission." The old man rolled the spatial ring through his fingers, not replying immediately as though he was ruminating over something. "I hear that you've gotten yourself into quite some trouble." "How was getting married trouble?" Theron asked as though he was well and truly perplexed. "You're playing a very dangerous game, child. Weaving the line you want isn't so easy. You'll end up crushed. In 2 weeks, I'll be marrying the love of my life." Theron said simply, "You're 14 years old. You don't know what love is. Saying this while sending me off to kill for you is a bit amusing, don't you think? You're also too cheeky for your own good. If you want to use your little facade, do it on someone who doesn't know the tenets like the back of their hand. And with circumflex. My real personality isn't nearly as fun," Theron said as though he didn't hear the implication in the words. "Are you aware how powerful bronze resonance geniuses of the province can become? Thralix is an ant. So what if he reached the silver resonance of his bloodline when the Ironhearts only have a silver resonance cap to begin with? There are those of the bronze resonance that not only have gold resonance caps, there are those that have even stronger bloodlines than that. And some of them have already awoken their bloodlines to gold resonance, while their bronze resonance bloodlines alone would already be stronger than Thralix's silver resonance Ironheart bloodline. But you actually sent an open invitation to them all? Have you lost your mind?" Theron smiled. "They think I only know how to beat up women." "You're a fool." Theron chuckled. "You tell me, old man. If a no-name marrying into a mere Earl clan because he has no noble lineage of his own sends out such an open invitation, how many of those arrogant geniuses you just mentioned would care to accept it?" The old man stopped twirling the ring through his fingers, looking up at Theron. "So you're betting on the luck of the draw?" "No, I don't care who comes. I'm undefeatable beneath silver resonance. I'm just trying to help you calm down. Your investment won't vanish overnight. How could I miss my wedding night?" The old man gave Theron a deep look. After a long while, he threw a jade out. Theron caught it and looked through it. A sect disciple. The number 1 outer disciple of the luminescent moon sect. It seems that he's about to be poached by the Obsidian Eclipse sect, and their elders don't want to see that. Better than Yanaway. So you were the one that killed him. What can I say? The thistles piss me off. But you didn't hand in the mission. I don't have a death wish. But you're not going to hand in this one either? The old man sneered. Would you look at that? You suddenly have so much faith in me. What happened to there being geniuses I couldn't handle? You're already talking as though I've succeeded. Has anyone ever told you that you're quite annoying? I thought you only saw it as a little facade. The old man waved a hand. Go, and don't come back unless I call you myself. Will do, unless I'm in trouble again. In which case, I'll be returning. The old man shook his head as he picked up his cup of tea. Theron had vanished into the woods again before he stopped sipping. Shaking his head again, the old man sighed. He actually left this corpse here for me to clean up. Ridiculous. This line alone was enough to make Theron raise an eyebrow. 20,000 silvers was the equivalent of 2 million bronzes. It was a substantial reward, one that was far more than one should ever expect for a bronze mission. But what was more curious was that it was the only reward. It wasn't until Theron read more that he found out additional details. Beifong practices the three main techniques of the luminescent moon sect. The technique set luminescent blade, the defensive method moonlit skin, and the control method luminescent rain. Outwardly, he has mastered all of the bronze resonance versions of these techniques to the adept boundary, but it is speculated that he has reached the consummate boundary with moonlit skin and has practiced the first few silver resonance moves of luminescent blade. Luminescent blade is a technique that emphasizes swiftness and sharpness. Gathering momentum is its main. Moonlit skin is especially powerful at night, and even more so beneath the full moon. So, it is advised to avoid combat. Luminescent rain is a technique that can convert mana into a unique spirit mana known as luminescent mana to the ancestors of the sect. It mimics the gravity of the moon and can make it difficult for those trapped in the domain to control their mana properly. Beifong is speculated to have stolen a very important jade of the sect. If this jade is recovered and returned, additional rewards can be discussed. It should be noted that without the methods of the luminescent moon sect's inheritances and their cultivation method, this jade is worthless to outsiders. It was the last line that stuck in Theron's mind. Could it be that Beifong was being framed for the loss of the verdant bloomstone? Or was there another reason? Did Beifong steal a very different jade? Theron couldn't help but wonder if the verdant bloomstone was related to this jade or not. Interestingly enough, though, the old man didn't even mention it. Did the old man not understand the underpinnings of what was happening here either? Or could it be that he was just waiting for Theron to come back with it too? Obviously, Theron couldn't return the jade to the sect personally. The old man would be the liaison. But if Theron did find the jade and pretended not to have it, then he might have to deal with the old man's impatience. The best-case scenario was that the old man didn't care about this jade, didn't know about it, or if he did know about it, didn't care to consider it as though it were beneath his notice. The worst-case scenario was that the jade was actually useful to the old man, and he was waiting for Theron to come back with it. I can't make a decision without knowing what the jade is first. I guess I will have to kill him. Theron fell into his thoughts. The odds that Beifong would come to his wedding to be part of the challengers would actually be quite low, especially if he could feel the heat from his own sect wanting him dead. But there were certainly methods of nudging things in that direction. Let's go with that, then. Sigil's laughter filled the room. He laughed so hard that he fell out of his chair. Fuck me. I didn't take you to be so cruel to the fair sex, little bro. He wiped tears from his eyes. Laugh it up, Theron said, shaking his head. I'm sure it's very amusing when you're not me. Okay. I won't laugh anymore. He had barely said the words when he burst into another fit. I'm sorry. I really can't take it seriously. What were you supposed to do? Let her beat you. He laughed for a while longer before he finally managed to climb back up to his chair. Finished. Sigil exhaled a high-pitched breath. I don't know, maybe, he spoke as he wiped tears from his eyes. Okay. This time, for real. Tell me what you need help with. Just put out a message for me, saying that the luminescent moon sect is trash for using this sort of method to protect the reputation of a weak disciple. If they want, I'll fight their number one outer sect disciple. Oh, and add that he won't last 20 exchanges for me. Sigil's lip twitched, and then he fell into silence for a long while. You know, you seem gentle, but you really do have a hard edge to you. I've heard of Beifong before, actually. He was adopted by a core elder of the sect that was once a chosen. Though he didn't become the patriarch of the sect, he was close and is only not the grand elder out of principle. Though no one knows the exact reason for that. Are you sure about 20 exchanges? How about 50 instead? Theron chuckled. It seems your confidence in me isn't too bad. Of course, my little brother can definitely win in 50. 20 just seems a little tight, especially since Beifong has never been documented as going all out. His strength is unpredictable. That's all right. I picked an auspicious day for my wedding. Auspicious? How? Don't you like the rain? Theron settled into meditation. It's no good. He had gotten addicted to the feeling of quick improvement, but after reaching the 8th resonance, he realized that it would take him at least a month and a half before he could knock on the door of the 9th resonance. If he used pills right now, he would be mostly wasting them. His core needed time to settle, and he would be particularly prone to accumulating impurities in this state. Pills would always come from them, but there were definitely states worse than others. Reaching the 9th resonance before the wedding would be impossible. But it seemed that Dean Thistle had decided to actually properly reward him for once. Theron took out a black box formed from wood that gave off a particularly strong floral scent. He undid the latch, but to his surprise, he didn't find any resources inside. A watermancy technique? Why would Dean Thistle give him such a thing? After an initial scan of the jade, Theron's eyes narrowed. Theron had expected Dean Thistle to give him something after he brought up Ernst Snub. But this wasn't what he expected, and he also knew he would be a fool to think that there was nothing wrong with the technique at all. What the Thistle Patriarch didn't realize, though, was that Theron would figure it out instantaneously. For a long while now, Theron had been building up a solid foundation of watermancy comprehension. It wasn't just that his cultivation technique was the simplest, but even his chosen mana skills were slowly built on top of one another. In fact, while others were chasing after power echoes, Theron had actually planned to get one of the easiest echoes to claim, coming from an imbued beast that was known for being difficult to catch and yet having no combat power. If not for the twist of fate that was the verdant Bloomstone, he would have easily continued down that route. Since he was a youth, Theron had come to understand that his cultivation would never be predicated on raw power. Watermancers didn't have enough of it. He would never be able to draw a water scythe, as sharp as a good blade in a Flexmancer's hand, nor would he be able to form a shield of water as solid as an Earthmancer's, and certainly not a Metal Mancer, nor would he be able to cast illusions as well as Spirit Mancers, nor heal himself as well as a Pill or a Light Mancer could. What he would be the best at was control. He needed to lean into it, and he needed to ensure that it was his greatest strength, and mana control was downstream from mana comprehension. The better he understood his element, the better he would be able to control it. Woodmancy might have been born for watermancy in part, but no matter how powerful Dean Thistle was, he couldn't fathom just how strong Theron's understanding of water mana was. Ironically enough, if this was before he took the 4th-year botany class, Theron would have known there was an issue, but wouldn't be able to comprehend what it was. Now, however, this is a domain skill. It can increase the water mana concentration in the region by a lot and lower the cost to myself. But if it's activated in this way, it would be very susceptible to absorption by a strong wood mana user. Theron had experienced having his water mana sapped away before in his battle with the Thornhulks. But this would be like that times 10 or 100. The secret was something Theron had only learned of recently. Polarity. The support aspects to this aren't hidden, which is part of what makes it so clever. The technique clearly outlines here that this would help with Mancers and other variants downstream from water mana, such as Ice Mancers, while also suppressing Fire Mancers. If I'm correct, Dean Thistle probably thinks that I'd stop there, assuming that to be the flaw, or maybe get me to think that he was only giving me this technique so that I could better support his family's geniuses in the future. When in reality, if I practice it like this, I'm one thought from a wood mancer away from having my body sucked dry of all its water mana. This technique, it's quite good, but tidal convergence. This was the sort of technique Theron couldn't trade for even if he wanted to. It was most definitely a high-tier bronze resonance technique, but it would certainly be classified as a clan secret by a powerful Watermancy clan, though Theron could think of none in the Nightingale Empire. It just does what the rain does for me. This technique would be useless to Theron in the rain. But outside of the rain, it might be able to give him about 20% of his usual strength in rain. All things considered, that wasn't too bad. And if Dean Thistle dared to send one of his geniuses to try to take advantage of the weakness of this method, well, there'd be quite some price to pay for that. Highland body, yes. This gives me an idea, though. If polarity can be used to attract water mana to me, there's no reason I can't make myself even stronger in the rain with these concepts. Theron's mind churned. He would have to finish raising Water Wrap and Water Scythe to consummate quickly. He had a feeling he would need more experience to figure out a method to do this. As for this technique, he guessed he could give it a go. It only took a night for Theron to reach adept in this new high-tier bronze resonance technique. The days passed, and shifts and changes began to occur in Thistlebrook City. The weight of Malaya's wedding was already quite heavy to begin with, but it only became more so with the implications. Theron and the Thistle counterattack had caused the Crown Prince to move back his public appearance with Thessa, while Theron's image as a brash and arrogant man was only growing. As for the man himself, Theron acted as though there was nothing coming over the horizon at all. In fact, in these last 2 weeks, he cleared another 4 academic stream class exams with a perfect desk grade. His credit total for the academy stream increased to 24, a perfect mirror to his 24 military stream credits. A first year with 48 credits. A shocking achievement, to be sure. But there was no doubt skepticism. While it was impressive to be a genius of 2 streams, there was no doubt that every subsequent credit was more difficult to get. Gathering 24 credits twice wasn't nearly as difficult as gathering 33 credits to graduate just once. The jury was still out on if Theron could continue this sort of momentum and match up against the best of the best. But he would certainly act as though he could nonetheless. Theron's brashness only grew as the wedding day approached. But while everyone was raising their eyebrows, wondering what a man marrying into his woman's clan could possibly have to be so arrogant about, Theron himself sat in a luxurious waiting room, dressed in his groom's robes. His expression was peaceful. His eyes were closed. Soon, he would retrieve his father's sword. 2 more months at most, just 2. Malaya sat in a seat of honor, maids and servants dashing around her. It should have been hard for someone to remain flushed for so long. At the very least, her heart should have given out long ago from the mixture of nerves and anxiety. But it seemed that she wouldn't be allowed to do even that much today. There were at least 3 wind mancers in the room, controlling currents to cool her down and yet not disturb her hair or makeup. It would be quite useful, and she should even be thankful, if not for the fact she almost wanted to pass out to have her own miniature time skip. There was nothing worse than the anticipation of waiting. Even now, she wasn't quite sure how she felt about this. But then again, she had always known that her marriage wouldn't be up to her. All things considered, though Theron was 4 years younger than herself, and she never really imagined things being like this, it was better than marrying someone 40 years older than her. She sighed. What sort of man are you really, Theron? While Malaya didn't have much life experience, there was still a reason why, of all the available students, Teacher Fern had still picked her out to be Theron's partner. If Theron hadn't leveraged some influence to force this to happen, she wouldn't believe it. She wasn't as naive as most people thought her to be. She was actually among the most intelligent in the Imperial Academy. This was the real reason she had avoided Theron for so long. He seemed like a gentle boy on the surface, but he had a coldness in him that made him unpredictable, like he could do or say anything he had to. But right now, she just really wanted to know why. Does he even like me at all? She thought silently. Oddly, these thoughts helped her calm. Theron opened his eyes. It's about time. According to the tradition of the Nightingale province, it was his job to pick up his bride with an escort and gifts. He had no noble status, so his gifts were provided by the Thistle clan. Since he was currently representing their face, it was only natural. But Theron was still surprised to step out of the room and find Sigil waiting for him. What? Why so surprised? I can't possibly allow my little brother to go off on his own, right? What if some shameless fellows try to bully you? Theron chuckled and then nodded. The two walked out from a side door of the wedding venue. They had rented out the entire purple scale tea house, luxurious banners of violet, maroon, and velvet red hanging from banisters and indoor balconies. Nigerian Iro. When the duo stepped out into the warm air, there was a long line of carriages and well-bred steeds adorned in beautiful wooden armors. Vines wrapped around their legs and bodies, but rather than making them slower, the pulsing manna in the air made it clear that this was the exact opposite. What are you expecting? Sigil asked. In response, Theron tapped a foot and landed on a horse at the front. With a movement of his own manna, he unhitched it from the procession. What am I expecting? Theron smiled. Nothing on the way there. Fun on the way back. After saying this, Theron kicked the side of the steed and shot off into the distance. Sigil was speechless. This wasn't the sort of briefing he wanted. How about some more detail? If we don't go now, we'll be wasting the rain. Theron's laughter echoed from the distance. Rain? Sigil raised an eyebrow and looked up to the clear sky. What is he? A rumble echoed. Sigil's pupils constricted. It took him a long while of silence before he slowly recovered. That was not normal. Theron had mentioned that there would be rain weeks ago, but Sigil had honestly forgotten, mostly because he thought Theron was just messing around. How could someone predict the weather? There were mana scientists that were capable, but definitely not 2 weeks out, and certainly not to the exact hour. Replace the stud. Let's go. Sigil's orders echoed out. The procession moved out through the main roads of Thistlebrook City. Theron led the charge, his long black hair fluttering in a high ponytail. His black and blue robes fluttered, the heaviness of his sleeves and their sheer volume seemingly not affecting him at all. His smile slowly faded from his face, and a deathly seriousness came over him as the Vermouth clan mansion closed in from a distance. Their wide gates, with a pair of lions facing out to the world, gave off a powerful presence. The Vermouth clan was a family of flexmancers especially known for their lion-like strength. Taking it quite literally, the feral beast became their spirit animal as well. All things considered, they weren't the perfect match for the Lamincent Moon sect that had inheritances more based in finesse than anything else, but geniuses of a path didn't have such limitations. Seeing Malaya's brother standing alone at the entrance, his eyes sharp and his aura deadly, Theron felt that quite intimately. Theron pulled the reins of his steed. As its forelegs reeled upward, he flipped off its back, landing to its side with a confident stride. With a deathly calm expression, he crossed the distance between himself and the gate as the procession behind him also slowed. Somehow, his horse remained obediently in place. Theron himself, though, came to a stop 2 meters from Aaron, looking up slightly to meet his gaze. Neither said a word. Theron didn't greet his brother-in-law-to-be, nor did Aaron explain why he was there, until he suddenly said something that made Sigil, who was already at the ready, jolt. Today, you have no choice but to take a palm from me. Aaron moved the instant he spoke. Too fast. Theron could hardly react before a palm slammed against his chest. His ribs deformed, his pupils constricted as a mouthful of blood came from his lips. Bang! The echo of the blow only resounded in his ears long after he was sent flying. Sigil burst up. He was slow to react, still preparing for interference from outside forces. He didn't think that the first blow would come from internal conflict. The Vermouth clan was on their side. They should understand how important his was. Aaron attacking Theron like this and heavily injuring him was like forcing them to admit their loss before things could even kick off. Sigil caught Theron's flying form, trying to dissipate some of the damage. But there wasn't much he could do about pure, raw power outside of cushioning and slowing the deceleration. Plus, Aaron's cultivation was far beyond his own as well. Aaron was supposed to be there to deal with the bullies that Sigil couldn't, not be one of them himself. Aaron! Sigil roared, his anger getting the best of him for a moment. While Sigil seemed quite happy and cheerful most often, he was under as much pressure as anyone. He couldn't afford for things to go wrong either. He might not be the heir apparent yet, but his father's success would directly translate to his own. If there was no Thistle clan, what would he take over in the future? He would just be a fugitive on the run if he could keep his life at all. Sigil honestly couldn't believe how idiotic Aaron was. What did he even think he was accomplishing here? There will always be a price to pay for those who hurt my little sister. I don't give a damn who you are, Aaron growled. If you think I don't understand your little political games and want to insult my intelligence like this, I'll gladly take his head instead. A madman. A true madman. Sigil was so baffled he didn't even know what to say. By the time he regained some of his mind, he snapped. You fool. If he fails, your sister fails. Your family fails. Your sister won't have wedding gowns prepared for her. She'll have a coffin instead. My Vermouth clan doesn't think so much, Aaron replied with a low rumble. We settle accounts, and we move by the weight of our hearts. When the time comes to deal with those things, I will be the first to stand in front of her. If someone wants to harm her, they will have to step over my dead body. There is simply no reasoning with him. Sigil was about to say more, but it was Theron who pressed a hand to his shoulder. That's enough. There was a steadiness to Theron's tone that belied the trembling in his chest. Nothing was remotely light about this blow. If there was any saving grace, it was that the breaks were clean and didn't puncture his lungs or flesh. But that didn't mean the reverberating remains of the attack hadn't ruptured some of his soft organs anyway. Right now, it was even hard to breathe properly, let alone battle. Still, he stood up straight. Did he expect such a thing? No. Was he surprised? Also no. They need a handicap regardless, Theron said lightly. Sigil's eyes narrowed. Somewhere deep inside, he felt like he had never seen the real Theron, as though there was some thin veneer separating them. He was more sensitive to these things than even his father, because while Dean Thistle only saw pawns, Sigil saw people. Our Nigerian Irio. Logically speaking, these sort of arrogant words would only be said by Theron the character. So, why did it feel like this was the first time he was hearing the true Theron speak? But more importantly than that, Theron had spoken so softly, it was as though he was saying the words only for himself. He's angry. It was odd. Sigil didn't understand this either. Theron wasn't someone who got angry easily. At least the true Theron wasn't. Sigil looked from Theron and then to Aaron in the distance. By the time he did so, Theron had already stabilized himself, standing to his full 5 feet 6 inches height. He smoothed out the wrinkles in his robes, using his water mana and then quickly drying it just the same. Soon, it didn't look like anything had changed. Walking forward again, he cupped his fists and bowed to Aaron. Greetings, brother-in-law. I have come to pick up my bride. Aaron's gaze flashed. That's enough, Aaron. Return. A gruff voice, even deeper and fuller than Aaron's, echoed. It wasn't clear where it was coming from, but it felt distant. Earl Vermouth. The gates slowly opened, and a palanquin carried by 4 women appeared. Each of them had boulder-like shoulders, and though their forms were still relatively slim and feminine, they had a hard edge to them that made one think of the military. And yet, each one was dressed in a beautiful dress. Theron walked up to the palanquin, the hidden, veiled form of Malaya within. Ignoring the 4 women, he walked to its side. He could feel the dangerous auras coming from them, but there was an even greater depth of chilliness coming from him. Malaya, Theron called out softly. Ah, yes, yes. Malaya hurriedly turned toward Theron. I'm sorry. It's not very easy to see through this. The veil is thicker than any I've seen before. Theron smiled gently. I've yet to see your face, but you look beautiful. Today, would you do me the honor of riding with me? The 4 women frowned. Ah, ride with you? Of course. Malaya didn't know how to say no in the first place. If she did, she would have likely never gone on a date with Theron. But this time, she felt that it would be odd if she did say no. Wouldn't they be sharing a room tonight? Her face flushed. For the first time, she was thankful for this heavy, thick veil. She reached out a hand, and Theron took it. Malaya squealed, caught off guard as she was swept into Theron's arms. A harsh whistle filled the air, and the unmoving steed rushed ahead. Theron grabbed its reins, swinging onto its body as the first rain droplets fell from the skies. I know we have quite a number of guests watching from the shadows today. You will pretend as though you haven't seen what just happened, though, and that's fine by me. If you think that this is enough to defeat the number one cultivator beneath Silvermancy, feel free to step forward. Theron stabilized Malaya in one arm, unsheathing a short sword with the other. He swept a glance over Aaron, the chilling light in his blue eyes unbelievably focused. Was he pissed off? Yes. He didn't care if Aaron wanted to protect his little sister, but standing in his way of retrieving his father's blade, that was unacceptable. He would remember this. Theron kicked his horse, and its hooves rose into the skies, a booming thunder echoing across the clouds. The moment the hooves landed on the paved stone, they shot out into the distance. How arrogant! The sentiment was the same across distant buildings. However, the one who spoke this time was a certain crown prince. By his side, there were several youths standing, each one with their heads lowered and their gazes measured. One of them particularly stood out, though, the logo of the Obsidian Eclipse sect hanging from their lapel in the form of a blackened moon eclipsing a violet sun. Malaya couldn't see what was happening, but she could feel just fine. The sudden changes and the additional heartbeat she could hear in her ear left her flustered and unsure how to react. This definitely wasn't traditional, not by any stretch of the imagination, but she was too flustered to understand why Theron was doing this. Her brother, though, understood just fine. For the first time in a long while, Theron displayed the pride of a man. So what if you were angry? Your sister would become my wife today, whether you like it or not, and I would defeat the geniuses of the world while I do it. His back stood tall, with splashes of water sparkling across the hooves of his steed, as he charged down the streets, as though the procession meant nothing to him at all. Theron's blade flashed. Slowed, it looked like a silvery light was crossing the rain droplets of the skies. The water pooled into a solid line, streaking across the air. A youth had barely appeared on the road when his head flew into the skies. They actually sent someone of the seventh resonance at him. If his mind wasn't so focused, he might have actually been offended. Fast, sharp, ruthless. He didn't hesitate for even a moment before he took a life, his horse not slowing for even the briefest moment. The skies opened up, clouds rolling in. As though dumping the fury of the heavens from above, a flash of lightning sparked like the herald of a coming torrent. The head barely rolled across the street, seeping blood, when Theron and Malaya passed it. Theron, what happened? Malaya felt the subtle pulse of mana in the air. Theron narrowed his eyes. His control was too high for someone to sense it so easily, and even less so for someone in bronze resonance. But he could chalk it up to her being so close. With her ear to his chest, she could probably even hear the circulation of his mana if she wanted to. "It's raining," Theron said with a gentle tone. "I'm just shielding us. We can't have your wedding dress getting wet." "Oh," Malaya said softly. She could definitely hear the rain now, but that hadn't felt like the continuous stream of mana you would need to form a shield. That mana had been sharp and swift deadly. Theron looked at her for a moment. "There's nothing for you to worry about," he said after a while. "Today will end just as planned." Malaya blinked beneath her veil. "Are you really going?" A youth stood in silence as the rain began to pelt down harder and harder. "What the hell are you thinking? Didn't you want to leave the luminescent moon sect anyway? Why do you care about their reputation?" The voice of a woman echoed again, aggravated and tainted by poisonous tendrils of anxiety. "Beifong, answer me." The tone became shrill. "Do you know why I want to go to the Obsidian Eclipse sect?" Beifong looked back to the woman behind him, his gaze cold. The depth of black in his eyes seemed no less deep than the crown prince himself. All he was lacking was foundation. No, what he was lacking the most was time. "It's because the luminescent moon sect is too small," he answered for the woman. "They've fallen too far from what they once were. Now, they can't even compare to an ant-like sect in the Obsidian Eclipse. It won't be long before I leave the Obsidian Eclipse sect as well and move on to a larger sect that I will also inevitably leave. My goal in this world is not something that you can fathom. Rue, I told you during our first night together that I would leave you. It's you who believe that you could change me. My blade doesn't move to the tune of anyone else. They can call me ungrateful. They can say I'm a traitor, but my Tao heart will remain without the slightest hint of dust. No one, though, no one is allowed to call me a coward, nor claim their blade to be stronger than mine. Bifong's robes fluttered and he vanished. I hate you. Rue watched with red eyes as he vanished, and then her eyes slowly turned cold. She turned to the bed, pulling her underwear and other undergarments back on. There was a slight twist of disgust on her face because she would have rather cleaned herself up first, but unfortunately, there was no time for that. At least he was decent in bed, she thought to herself. But he is far too sharp, far too intelligent, and far too diligent. I didn't find a single opening at all. Today, though, there just might be one. She pulled her dress down over her ample breasts. The movement caused a slight shimmer in the reflective mirror across from her, revealing the faintest edges of a familiar curse mark. The mark of daggers of the night. I'm in the territory of another branch right now, though. I need to be cautious. A sparkling light reflected in Rue's eyes, and then she vanished. The door opened and closed all on its own. The mess of the previous night, left behind for others to clean up. This Theron character is quite interesting, though. He seems firmly tied to the thistles and the chaos here. There might be something to take advantage of. Corpses littered the streets. By now, the security guard of Thistlebrook City should have been out in full force, and yet they seemed to have completely turned a blind eye to the happenings. The moment someone appeared, Theron didn't even hesitate. A single stroke of his blade was all it took, the rain falling around him seemingly becoming an extension of his domain. But he was waiting for a real challenge to appear. Would they continue this vain attempt to tire him out? Or would they finally place something decent before him? Sect disciple, imperial scholar, clan genius. It didn't seem to matter at all what was put across from him. They all fell just the same. 7th, resonance. 8th, 9th, quasi-silver. Dead, dead, dead. He never took more than a single strike. Never more than a light swing of his arm and a flicker of his wrist. And then someone finally blocked a blow. A heavy-set young man skid back a step in the quickly wetting streets. When he stopped, he looked up with a grin, a heavy sword across his chest. You swing heavy for a waterman, sir. I guess you're quite lucky that it's raining today, or else you would have probably kissed Earth by now. It's too bad that doesn't matter much to me. The heavy-set young man swung his sword and slammed it into the ground. My name is Easton Burdows of the Burdows Marquisette clan. 7th bronze resonance, ranked 37th in my clan at that cultivation level. He announced himself in almost excruciating detail. It couldn't have been clearer that a message was being sent. 37th? Theron asked lightly. That's right. Easton grinned. And I assume you're here to show me how unimpressive I am? Your words, not mine. Theron carefully set Malaya down on the back of the horse, falling to the ground lightly. All of a sudden, his protection against the rain vanished, and he was instantly soaked through. A Marquisette clan had chosen to take personal action against him today. What a nice chance to make the higher-ups who ignored the plight of his family bleed. Theron took another step and then seemed to vanish. Easton's vision blurred, but his reaction was fast. He couldn't see Theron clearly, but his training took over. Watermancers in combat were rare, but there was no cultivator worth their salt that wouldn't understand at least the fundamentals of battling one of the 4 main elements. While Watermancers were rare in combat, Watermancers themselves were everywhere. Rather than trying to find Theron's exact location, Easton slammed his sword into the ground. A pulsing wave of mana kicked up, and the air around bristled. Theron appeared, his body twisting in a sideways arc. His second blade had appeared in his open hand as he twirled. Chi-chi. They sliced against the force field of rushing mana one after another, slicing a path through. Easton took another step back, this time to create distance as he pulled his sword out from the ground. A pulsing flux mana formed through his blade, giving it a steaming white aura that made it look as though the metal was scorching hot to the touch beneath the pelting rain. Theron landed on the other side of the rushing force field, steadily regaining his balance. But Easton's attack was already coming. What Easton had used just now was an incredibly common method of the Fluxmancers. Flux mana was far sturdier and solid than other mana forms, making it incredibly good at pushing and pulling on things. But this time, Easton didn't activate Force Push for the sake of completely dealing with Theron. He wanted 1, to find him, and 2, to delay just enough to end all of this in a single blow. But there was also a third. Theron had only just stabilized himself on his feet, a tick later than usual. His injuries might have been suppressed by his will, but his body would be slower and less effective no matter what he did. By the time he was ready to attack again, the length of the great sword was already right above his head. With Force Push having only just activated for a brief instant, there was no rain to use at all. Die! Easton sneered. To think that a person on this level would claim to be undefeatable beneath Silver Resonance. His sneer was still frozen on his face when his arms collapsed to the ground, not having the slightest bit of strength to them. Sliced off at the elbows, blood spurted as Easton continued his downward stroke, but without any leverage from his body. His great sword was calmly batted away by Theron. The pain only hit the Marquezette clan genius several moments later. He barely had time to register that Theron, who had just been soaked through by the rain, was completely bone dry now. And even that only lasted a brief instant before the effects of Force Push ran out and the downpour returned. Theron's short sword pierced through Easton's chest. Without forearms and hands, the young man couldn't even begin to resist. He just stood there, looking at the blade in his chest as though he couldn't believe it. Bang! An explosion bombarded the inside of his ribcage, several water bullets booming outward as though Theron wanted to ensure that he was dead. Pulling his sword back, Theron allowed the rain to clean the blood away. He gave the corpse before him a look and then raised his head to the distance. The Crown Prince stood in silence, but his eyes narrowed when he saw the direction Theron was looking in. How had he picked them out? This wasn't something a bronze resonance should be able to do. Even a silver resonance expert would find this outside the range of their third eye. Res. Cuco. Moreno. You two will go next. The two frowned, but when the Crown Prince looked at them, they shuddered, hiding their reaction and dissatisfaction. They might not be from a Marquezette clan, but in their opinion, Easton could hardly be considered as such. What was being ranked 37th at the 7th resonance worth, exactly? Asking them to go together was as good as asking them to fight together. They already didn't want to be here. If not for the Crown Prince forcing their hands, they would have all ignored the talk from an ant of a branch city Imperial Academy. Cuco was a first year of the main Imperial Academy, having already accumulated 17 credits. If not for being overeager, she would have had a perfect 18, but she could only blame herself. Yet, instead of making up for that lost credit, she was here instead, dealing with a boastful bastard who thought that his 48 credits were worth anything compared to hers. Moreno was likewise a first year, but of the academic stream. To him, it made even less sense to be here. He didn't like to battle, and he didn't like to cultivate, but he was known as a madman because of an incident that took place 2 months ago. Both Cuco and Moreno were from knight clans, technically nobles, but not truly considered so by anyone other than commoners. Yet, Moreno had killed the genius of a Duke clan for disrespecting his favorite author, earning him a reputation not only for what he did, but the fact he somehow managed to survive. A genius that had accumulated 36 academic stream credits in just half of their first year. Moreno's expression was almost lazy, while Cuco was struggling the most with trying not to show her displeasure as the two shot out. Behind the Crown Prince, only 3 remained. Etherian himself, though, didn't seem to mind what was happening at all. Theron looked away, his eyes narrowing somewhat in pain before he suppressed it. The geniuses of the capital were, indeed, something else. If these were the ones that insisted on coming now, that much would be fine, but it seemed that he would have to take a more straightforward approach. He leapt back onto his steed, taking Malaya into his arms. Somehow, the both of them were completely dry. The chilling light in his eyes only deepened. He could sense them coming.